kind of you to return to see Lesson 7 of this study of the book of Ruth, the Lord's Steadfast Love Redeems. The title of this lesson is Returning. We have come to the end of chapter 1 of Ruth in our study. In verse 21, Naomi lays out what might be the theme for the whole book of Ruth. She says, "I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty." I would like to show how this theme, full and empty, goes through the whole book of Ruth, and how it operated in the lives of Elimelech and Naomi and their whole family. I'd like to show how it was full and empty spiritually and physically. We can use this to review chapter 1. First, Naomi went to Moab full physically. She not only had a husband, she had not only one son, but two, and the hope of them marrying and providing grandsons for her. She was full. They were seeking fullness in Moab with, we could say, dollar signs. They were hoping for material prosperity there. And they planned to stay in Moab for just a short time and then return to their own people in Bethlehem. Spiritually, was this family full? They left the promised land, meaning they left the presence of God in worship. They left fellowship with the people of God. They were willing to live among the pagan people of Moab. Physically, when they got to Moab, everything fell apart. Their lives emptied of everything that they considered dear. Elimelech died. They stayed in Moab 10 long years. Then the two sons died, childless. The three widows, Naomi, Orpah, and Ruth, had no way of supporting themselves. Then one of the daughters-in-law went back to her people and to her gods. Naomi felt bitter with what the Lord had allowed to happen in her life, and she did feel empty. Spiritually, there was some fullness in Naomi's life that we can celebrate. Yes, she still believed that God was arranging the events of her life in spite of her tremendous loss. She still believed in the God of Israel. She could not understand it, but she knew that the Lord was actively working in her life. And then news that the Lord had given his people bread in Bethlehem encouraged her to go on the long, weary road back to Bethlehem, back to the place where the one true God was worshipped. A tremendous evidence of the Lord giving spiritual fullness in their lives was when Ruth professed faith in the God of Israel. Ruth committed herself to Naomi, but also profoundly to the Lord. Although she did not seem to value Ruth, Naomi in the future would finally have complete fullness in her life through God's work and providence. I will read chapter 1, verse 22. So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. Here is an unusual statement that seems to say that Ruth was living in Bethlehem, but she had never been there before. The Hebrew states, according to commentators, that she did return to Bethlehem. So how did she return when she had never been there before? The first idea is perhaps it was that she was part of Elimelech's family from the time that she married Mahlon, the son of Elimelech and Naomi. And even though she was widowed, she was still a part of that family. And that is how she could be thought of as being a member of the family and as having returned to Bethlehem. However, Psalm 87 has an interesting idea, and it's a statement that's made 3 times in the psalm. It says, "This one was born here." The psalm clearly identifies here as Zion, the city of God's special presence. This is referring to whom? Rahab is named, as well as a bunch of the nations that were terrible enemies of Israel. This psalm indicates that one day there will be many people coming from these terrible nations that were the enemies of Israel, and they're going to come and they're going to believe in the Lord, and they're going to worship him. May this apply also to Ruth, as it applies to Rahab, because Rahab is mentioned in Psalm 87. Is this what the author had in mind when he said, Ruth returned to Bethlehem? This one was born here. In God's way of thinking, this one was a true native of Israel, a person who belonged to the household of Jacob, of Abraham, of Israel. I would encourage you to think about what it means for your heart and for your mind to return to your Creator in conversion, in daily repentance, and in worship. Believers are called upon to be mindful of, that is, to remember the goodness of God, to meditate on his hesed, his steadfast love. We need to contrast this with the mindfulness of today's society. These are things that have been imported from Eastern religions, from Hinduism and Buddhism. And they are extremely popular, but they don't have anything to do with Christ. My husband and I were always so grieved when we were in Taiwan, because it seemed that every part of Chinese society was laced through with Buddhist thought. And it grieves me now to see Americans picking up pagan things from Buddhism, rejecting Christianity, and having their ears and eyes tickled with these new religious thoughts. Ruth joined herself to the people of God in her family's village of Bethlehem. The Lord not only took her into the chosen people of God, he also honored her to be the grandmother of the great King David and the ancestress of the even greater King, the Lord Jesus. Now let's look at the end of chapter 1 by pointing out that the last sentence of chapter says this: "And they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest." God was so kind to bring Naomi and Ruth to Bethlehem at just the time when they could have a way to find some food. And now I want to tell you another story from my life. This is how the Lord moved me from life in the U.S. to go halfway around the world. When I began my teaching career, I was in a church that emphasized missions. And so I decided that I would read some missionary biographies. And I was especially drawn to those about old China. And as I read them, I said, I want that kind of faith. 5 years later, an evangelist came to our church. And at the end of the service, he asked people to stand if they were willing to go where God wanted them to go, in the time he wanted them to go, wherever he wanted them to go, however he wanted them to go. And I thought, well, every Christian in the church ought to stand up for this. And 5 of us stood up. And my friend said, uh-oh, Judy's going to the mission field. And then I got scared. I said, oh no, if I really give myself to God, he'll say, aha, I've got you now. I'll make you miserable. I'll send you to a mud hut somewhere in Africa with snakes and cannibals? No. With snakes and wild animals in the jungle. And so then when my friend said, oh, Judy's going to the mission field, I said, oh no, I don't need to go. I have my students in my classroom. Not all of them are Christians, and that's my mission field right here. Thank you very much. I will bury myself in this small southern mill town in my miserable single life for the rest of my life. 5 years later, another evangelist came. And this time, the title of his sermon was Vows Made and Vows Not Kept. I was sitting there in church smugly thinking, I've kept all my vows. And he mentioned specific vows. And he said, vows made in the military. Check. I was never in the military. Vows made when your children were baptized. Well, I considered my students to be my children, but no, I didn't have any children of my own. Check. Marriage vows. I was single. Check. And then I asked Lord, kind of flipping up a prayer to him, not very serious, not very reverent. And I said, Lord, if there are any vows that I haven't kept, please let me know. And the next moment, the word missions passed through my mind, and it took my breath away because I knew that this was one vow that I hadn't kept. And I said, Lord, I'll go. I had an application 5 years earlier to go with my mission board. And I had put my name on it. And then I put it on the back of the kitchen table. And then I put it carefully in with my important documents in the file. And then I put it in the back of the closet. Well, after I said, I really will go, I got that thing out and I began to fill it out. And I back then, it was all by hand. I wrote until my hand hurt. And I was so full of joy that I really was going to the mission field. During these years, I began to talk with my widowed mother about going to the mission field. I had always told her that since I was single, it would be logical for me to be the one to take care of her whenever she needed me. But then when I talked to her about going to the mission field, at first she didn't say anything. And then as I talked over some years with her, she said, I've got the solution for you. You can go teach Native American children in northern New Mexico. There's a wonderful school there where you could teach them. The translation was, I could easily hop on a plane and come to see you if you don't leave the U.S. But I was convinced that the Lord really did want me to go overseas. So I continued to talk about it with her. And then, as I talked more, she gave me the impression that I could wait for many years before I went, because after all, I was just in my early 30s. And I could wait until she wasn't there anymore. It struck me, she was saying, wait until I die to go. The Lord gave me this sentence, this thought. Do I have to take your mother away in death before you're willing to obey me? Oh, Lord, no, I'll go. And so I told my mom, I have to go. And then she came to grips with it. She let me go in her heart, and she became my biggest supporter. She came to visit me 7 times, flying trans-Pacific from Chicago to Taipei, most of those times by herself. This is my mama, who was a housewife all of her life and who had an 8th grade education. She just wanted to see us. And later on, she wanted to see her grandchild and hardly missed one of her birthdays. So that's how the Lord changed my mom's thinking as she let me go. In Lesson 8, we'll meet Boaz, the man through whom the Lord redeemed Naomi and Ruth. If you have stumbled on this YouTube channel and this lesson and want to see more of them, please subscribe, and all of the lessons will be coming available as we film them and edit them. Thank you.